Chapter 8 of Ester Ried Yet Speaking. Ester Ried Yet Speaking by Pansy. Chapter 8. What would you do, dear? She joined in his laugh, albeit there was a tender look in her eyes. After a moment she said gently, "It is not scheming, Evan. I am only trying to set about the work for which I have been chosen. I'll tell you how it all came to me. I was reading, my morning reading, you know, after you had gone, taking little dips here and there in the fashion that you think is so unsystematic, and I came upon this verse, 'He is a chosen vessel unto me.' You know, about Paul? Well, it came to me with a sudden sense of awe and beauty, the being chosen of God to do a great work. I stopped reading to think it out. What a grand moment it must have been to Paul when he realized it. And I began to feel almost sorry that we lived in such different times, with no such opportunities. I stopped right in the midst of my folly to remember that I was as certainly chosen of God as ever Paul was, for assuredly I did not come to him of myself, nor begin to love him of myself, and therefore he must indeed have chosen me. And I wondered whether probably each Christian had not a work to do as definite as Paul's, a work that would be given to no other, unless indeed the chosen one failed. I did not want to fail, and I asked God not to let me. Then, of course, I set to wondering what my work, or my part of some other person's work, could be. It was the morning after you had told me that about Ester Ried. You cannot think how that impressed me. I could not get away from the wonderment as to how her work was prospering, and whether there were chosen ones enough, or if there might possibly be a little place for me. I couldn't settle anything, and finally I decided to look at Paul's work a little while. Of course, it was not reasonable to suppose that the duties of the great apostle had anything in common with my bits of effort. Still, I said, the directions given him may help me a little. And Evan, what do you think was the first thing I found? Why, this: 'The God of our fathers hath chosen thee, that thou shouldst know his will.' Surely, so far, the things for which both he and I were chosen were parallel. I looked further, and see that just one. That was the very next. Was not I, too, chosen for that? 'Thine eyes shall see the King in his beauty.' I said over the beautiful promise to assure myself that it was true, and went on. 'And shouldst hear the voice of his mouth.' Was it not strange, Evan? Certainly I shall hear my King speak, often and often, when I get home. Only think of it, so far Paul was not ahead of me. I hurried to find another reference to Paul's work, and I found this. Let me read it to you." Her bit of dainty sewing was suddenly pushed one side, and up from the depths of the rose-lined work-basket came a small, plainly bound Bible, much marked. A rapid turning of the leaves, and an eager disciple read, "I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness, both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in the which I will appear unto thee." Now, Evan, you know the veriest child can be a witness if he knows anything about the facts, and I do certainly know some wonderful things about Jesus to which I could witness, and besides, isn't it reasonable to suppose that he will appear to me every day with things for me to witness to? And then I read this: Paul sent to the Gentiles, you know, but for what? To open their eyes, and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins, and inheritance among them which are sanctified, by the faith that is in me. Evan, was there ever a more wonderful work to do in the world than that? And yet I cannot tell you how it made me feel to discover, or at least to realize, that a great deal of it was my work. Of course, I naturally began to ask myself, what Gentile was there for me to reach? Whose eyes must I try to open? Do you know, that very afternoon I met Mr. Ried and heard of those boys? They interested me from the first, and what he told me about his sister increased the interest. Then when I saw them! Evan, if ever boys were in the power of Satan, they are. And to think that they may have an inheritance among them which are sanctified! This morning when I saw where some of them lived, and imagined how they lived, I felt stunned for a moment. It seemed to me impossible. What means could possibly be found of sufficient power to fit them for such an inheritance? And then directly came the closing words of the commission, "Through faith that is in me." Evan, God will save them, and I think he will let me help. "Amen," said Mr. Roberts, and his voice was husky. When his wife was in one of her exalted moods he always admired her with a sort of reverence. He had been for years an earnest worker. He carried business plans and business principles into the work. He studied cause and effect, and calculated and expected certain results to follow certain causes, like a mathematical problem. Not that he by any means forgot the power of faith, or in any sense attempted to do his work alone. He was a Christian who spent much time on his knees. But little Flossy brought so much of the childlike, unquestioning spirit into her work, that sometimes he stood in awe, not knowing whether he could follow her. It was not so much a mathematical problem to be worked out, as it was the faith that can move mountains. As a little child relies on a strength beyond his own, knows he is neither strong nor wise, fears to stir a step alone. Mr. Roberts often found himself quoting these lines when his wife gave him glimpses of her heart, and at such times he had no hesitancy in deciding that the steps she took were not alone, but the Lord was with her. The postman's ring broke in on their quiet. "I hope there are letters from home to night," Mrs. Roberts said. "Real long ones. It is a week since we have heard." "And I ought to hope that they would require a first reading in private," her husband answered, as he seized his neglected pen. "It is the only way in which these business letters will get answered. I find the temptation to talk to you irresistible." One letter, but that was of comfortable dimensions and weight. "It is from Marion," Mrs. Roberts said, delight in her voice, after the first glance at the familiar writing. She was presently lost in its many pages, and the business of letter writing went on uninterruptedly for some time. Mrs. Marion Dennis had not forgotten her fondness for her pretty little Flossy, nor forgotten that, softly innocent little creature though she was, she possessed a wisdom far above those who are credited with having keen insight, even a wisdom so subtle, and withal so tender, that its source could only be infinite wisdom. So she, in company with many others, was learning to turn to the friend so much younger than herself, as one in whom she could safely confide. "Dear little Flossy," so the letter ran, "I suppose, though you should live to be a white-haired old lady, sitting with placid face and fluted cap and spectacles, in your high-backed arm-chair, in the most treasured corner, mayhap, of some granddaughter's choicest room, I, writing to you, would still commence, 'Dear little Flossy.' That I have to cover it from prying eyes by the dignified and respectable Mrs. Evan Roberts, is almost a matter of amusement to me. I fancy I can see you making a journey through some of the Chautauqua avenues, picking your way daintily towards Palestine, bending lovingly over the small white stones that mark the village of Bethany, a pink on your cheek, born, as I thought, of the excitement of being among those tiny photographs of the wonderful past, but born in part, I now believe, of the fact that Mr. Evan Roberts joined us in our walk. Oh, little mousie, how quiet you were! Well, many things have since transpired. We are old married women, you, Ruth, and Eurie and I. I suppose the contrast in our lives, the outward portion of them, I mean, is still as strongly marked, perhaps more so, than it was when we were in Chautauqua together. We were girls then; we are matrons now, and with the taking on of that title, Ruth and I took special and great responsibilities. To night it rains. Mr. Dennis has been called to the upper part of the city, away out to Springdale, in fact, to see a sick and dying man, and I am alone and almost lonely. If I could summon any one of the three to my aid and comfort, I would. I am almost as lonely as I was on some of those evenings in the old boarding house. Still there are differences. The smoky old stove is not. A summer warmth floats through the house, born of steam. No ill-smelling kerosene lamp offends your aesthetic friend to night, but the softest of shaded drop lights sheds a halo around me. Isn't that almost poetic? Moreover, oh blessed thought! I have no examination papers to prepare, no reports to make up, nothing to do but visit with you. Also, I will admit just to you, that this is another and most blessed difference between this and my lonely past. At almost any moment now I may hope for Dr. Dennis's ring, and when he comes all sense of loneliness will instantly depart. Ah, Flossy, dear Flossy, this is such a difference as even you cannot appreciate. You had your mother and father, and all your dear home friends, and I had no one. And besides—here I hesitate, lest you may be too obtuse to understand the reasoning—you have only added Mr. Roberts to your circle of treasures. He is grand and good, I know, and I like him without even a mental reservation. But, my dear, I have added Dr. Dennis. Can human language say more? Nonsense aside, sweet little woman, God has been very good to you and me. Yet, Flossy, do you remember how, during those last months in which we were together, I fell into the habit of telling you a great deal about the Thorns, and admitted to you once that they pricked less when they had felt your soothing touch? I want to tell you something. Our Gracie, I am so sorry for her, yet I don't know what to do. She is living a most unhappy life, and of course she shadows our lives also. I told you, dear, about Professor Ellis. He is still trying to convince poor Gracie that I, being her stepmother, must be her natural enemy, reminding her that before I came into the family her father was entirely willing to receive his calls, and allowed her to accept his attentions. Don't you see, isn't it strange at all that the poor little girl should believe him and turn from me? She has many judicious helpers in her father's congregation. There are those who sigh over her almost in my hearing. Poor Gracie, they say, how changed she is! She used to be so bright and happy. There is something unnatural in these second mother relations. All high-spirited children rebel. Imagine such talk helping Gracie! Meantime, what do you suppose can be Professor Ellis's motive? I cannot think that he cares for her. I almost do not believe that there is enough purity left in him even to admire a pure-hearted young girl, certainly not one with such high ideals and earnest ambitions as Gracie had. Why does she admire him, I fancy I hear you asking. My dear, she doesn't. She thinks she does, and at 17 such thoughts sometimes work irreparable mischief. But left alone, one of these days she would make the discovery that she was flattered by his attentions because he is nearly 15 years older than she, and is brilliant in conversation, and quoted as the finest musician in the city. I wish I knew more things about him. What I do know shows me plainly enough the sort of man he is. But with these guileless young things, it seems as though one had to unmask wickedness very thoroughly before they will believe that it is anything but gossip or misrepresentation. He has gone away for a 6 weeks' vacation. I don't know where, nor does Dr. Dennis. Gracie knows, but does not enlighten me. Flossy dear, could you give me a little wholesome advice, do you think? I wonder, sometimes, whether I was not too complacent over my proposed duties. Such schemes as I had! I was going to be the blessedest stepmother that girl ever had. That would not be saying much, possibly. Don't we all incline to think that the second mothers must be wrong, and the sons and daughters poor abused darlings? But I loved Gracie, you know, and she seemed to love me, and to be so happy over the thought of our near relationship. There is very little happiness from any such source during these days. Gracie has retired into dignity. She can be the most dignified young woman on occasion that I ever beheld. She is not rude to me; on the contrary, she is ceremoniously polite, calls me Mrs. Dennis, and all that sort of thing, when necessity compels her to call me anything; but she speaks as little as possible, sits at table with us 3 times a day, when she cannot secure an excuse for absence that her father will accept; says yes, sir, and no, sir, obediently to him, and no, ma'am, thank you, to me, and that is the extent of our conversation. Generally her face is pale and her eyes red, and at the first possible moment she begs to be excused, and retires to the privacy of her own room and locks her door. Her father has stopped her music lessons; at least she preferred to have them stopped rather than take lessons of any other person, so she practices no more. She continues her German and French, and secures good reports from the professors; but there is an air of weariness and dreariness about everything she does that makes one alternate between a feeling of deep pity for her and a desire to box her ears or shut her up in a corner until she can behave herself. As a rule, however, I am sorry for her. I was young once myself. I was undisciplined, I had no mother, and I had 1,000 wild fancies, any one of which might have ruined me. What do you think you would do, dear, if Mr. Roberts had a daughter, and you were her mother? You are all in a flush now, and have lain down this sheet and said aloud, What an idea! Marion does say the most absurd things. Well, then, if you were Marion Dennis, and stood before God in the place of mother to Grace Dennis, what do you imagine you would do? I'll tell you my policy. I am uniformly cheerful in her presence; gay, if I can make gaiety out of anything, not toward her father, you understand, because I can fancy that might irritate her. I really try to be gay toward Gracie herself; but can you imagine an attempt to be cheery with a tombstone? I study as much as I can her tastes, in the ordering of dinner and desserts, and arrange the flowers that I know she likes best, and in short try to do all those little bits of nice things that I feel certain you would do in my place. And just here I may as well own that I learned these small prettinesses, studying you. Never should have thought them out for myself. Flossy, Dr. Dennis is one of the most patient and long-suffering of men, but it is very hard for him to be patient with poor Gracie; harder than it is for me. First, because I know by personal experience just what a turbulent young creature a miss of 17 or 18 can be; and secondly, because it is upon me her displeasure falls most heavily, and that naturally he resents. Why am I writing all this to you? I don't know, childie, really, save that I remember what a curious way you have of telling Jesus all about your friends and their trials, and I remember with great comfort that you are my friend. Don't imagine me as miserable. I can never be that so long as Christ is the present helper that he is to me now; and you do not need to be told that I daily thank him for giving me my husband. But I think you will understand better than many would how earnestly I desire to fill the place of mother to my bright young motherless Gracie, with her dangerous beauty and her dangerous talents, and her capacity for being miserable. Oh, I want to do more than my duty. I want to love her with all my heart, and to have her love me. If it were not for that man, who always hated me, and who, I believe in my heart, has sought her out and is pressing his attentions upon her because he sees a possibility of stinging me through her, I might hope to fill the place in her heart that I thought I could. The letter closed abruptly at this point, and was finished a few days afterwards in a different strain, giving plenty of home news, and being full of the brightness which always sparkled in Marion's letters. But it was the first 2 or 3 pages to which Mrs. Roberts turned back, and which she thoughtfully reread. Then she interrupted the busy pen. "Evan, are not the business letters nearly done? I want to read this to you, and then I want to talk to you." "Delightful prospects, both of them," he said with energy, as he added the last hurried line, signed and delivered to his wife to enclose in its envelope, then pushed aside writing materials and sat back to enjoy. "It isn't all delightful," his wife said, shaking her head. "I did hope that poor Marion was going to have a few years of rest. Her life has been such a hard one." CHAPTER IX.